Something happened.
Are we live?
Yes.
Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the City of Everett Planning Commission, Tuesday, May 19, 2020. Obviously, we are in a bit of a different forum to conduct this meeting tonight, so we would appreciate everyone's patience as we all adjust to these unique circumstances. Let's go ahead and begin with a roll call.
Chair Yanasak.
Present.
Commissioner Labra.
Present.
Commissioner Holland.
Here.
Commissioner Tisdall.
Here.
Commissioner Beck.
Here.
Commissioner Zielinski.
Here.
Commissioner McGinn.
Here.
Commissioner Lark.
Here.
Commissioner Finch.
Here.
So that's everybody. Again, welcome. I'm just going to explain a little bit about how we're going to operate this meeting in this unique forum. We are available, I think, on the Everett channel. Also, participants are able to call in, and if they want to comment or speak at the appropriate time. And we're also available for on the computer. You can access through the Microsoft Meetings app. We are, I think, for just so everyone's on the same page, I think we are going to ask that all commissioners turn off, not appear on your video feed, so mute your video feed. And we're going to ask everybody to turn off your microphone or to mute your telephone until it is your opportunity to speak. And we'll go through the list when we're going to call on people. This may be a little bit redundant, but I do want to let people know, if you're a member of the community who is wanting to join or participate in this call, the phone number to call in, if you want to write this down, the number is 425-616-3920. You would then be asked to enter a conference ID number, and that number is 409-067-329#. And again, when it's time for public input, we will go through the list of people who are on the call, and we'll identify people by the last 4 digits of your phone number. And when that number is called, if you are wishing to speak, you can unmute and go ahead and make your comments at that time. I understand that by clicking on your phone the *6, that will toggle your phone between the mute and the unmute function. And again, we please ask that you mute your phone until you are called upon and offered the opportunity to speak. The next item that we need to deal with here is approval of minutes from our last meeting, which was on March 3rd, 2020. Those have been distributed to commissioners, and I wonder if there's a motion.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion or should I add this? Any comments or concerns about or additions to the minutes?
Who made the motion to approve?
Michael Finch.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll assume that no comments for any additions or changes. So, Kathy, want to go ahead and do the roll call?
Commissioner Finch?
Yes.
Commissioner Lark?
Yes.
Commissioner McGinn?
Yes.
Commissioner Zielinski?
Abstain.
Commissioner Beck?
Abstain.
Commissioner Tisdall?
Yes.
Commissioner Holland? Commissioner Holland?
Here.
We're voting on minutes.
Oh, okay. I just got let back in the meeting. Approve as presented.
Commissioner Labra,
Sorry, I was trying to comment that there was one correction I would like to make. It's just that I'm listed as present and absent, both, and I was there. So with that one change, I would vote to approve the minutes.
I'll make that change. Terry Yanasak,
Yes, with that change.
thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and we can go through the commissioners, see if there's any reports. I guess we could, I could call down the list. Commissioner Finch, any report?
No report. Thank you.
Commissioner Holland?
No report. Thanks.
Mr. Lavra?
No report.
Commissioner McGinn?
No report.
Mr. Lark?
Yeah, just a quick little update. I know if you look at the minutes, you'll see I mentioned being activated. That is still happening. Things just got a little delayed because of a pandemic. And I will hopefully I'll still be able to attend virtually going forward. That being said, just also want to note from personal experience, I know we are the Planning Commission and not we're not so much in charge of the roads, but I would urge the city to start considering ways or roads to pedestrianize in this particular time. As somebody who is required to work out in one of their professional capacities and run and meet military standards, it is becoming more and more crowded out on the roads, and social distancing is becoming more and more difficult. So just wanted to put that into the minutes and send that note along to the City Council.
Commissioner Beck?
No report.
Commissioner Zelinski?
No report.
And Commissioner Tisdale?
None.
I think that's everybody. I have nothing. So let's go ahead and move on to our item 1 on our agenda tonight, and I'll turn it over to staff. I think Alan is going to start.
Thank you. Alan Giffen, Planning Director. This is a meeting. We'll talk a little bit about, or quite a bit about, a change in our work plan for Rethink Zoning. If you'll recall, we had planned to do a significant overhaul to our land use code, including the establishment of all new zones throughout the city. Seem to have an echo on my end of the computers.
Yeah, does somebody need to go on mute? If everybody who's listening could check their phone and make sure you're muted. We're getting some background noise.
Okay, that seems to be better. So the Rethink Zoning process was an attempt for the city to do a major overhaul to its land use code, including such things as creating all new zones, significantly reducing the number of zones, consolidating many commercial, industrial, and residential zones into a fewer number of zones, and also to consider adding some housing types that are not currently permitted in single-family zones or on a limited basis to make those housing types a little bit more freely permitted, and to also change the way that we measure building heights in single-family zones and elsewhere in the city. As a result of the pandemic and our inability to have good public meetings, this is the first one that we've had in over 2 months, and as a result of the COVID financial impacts to the city, in which the city has offered, asked staff members who are interested in separating from city service to volunteer to do so. 2 staff members from the planning department have taken that offer. both of us, myself and staff member Dave Tyler, will be leaving the city June 30th. And so both of us being involved in the Rethink Zoning effort, it will diminish the amount of staff resources available to work on the project. As a result, we wanted to scale back the scope of the project and to still carry forward with a number of changes that will be more format related and still some substantive changes, but not as many substantive changes. Most significantly, the changes that we had proposed originally for single family zones, we will put on hold and will perhaps revisit those at a future date. This year, what we would like to do is get finished the consolidation of several titles of the Everett Municipal Code that deal with land use into a single unified development code. And as part of that, we also want to maintain the progress that we were making on consolidating multifamily zones, commercial zones, and industrial zones. David Stallheim and Dave Tyler will make presentations tonight to get into a little bit more detail on the nature of those changes. But as a result of those events, we are scaling back the proposal. The intent, though, would be to finish the scaled back version of Rethink Zoning, which we are calling Rethink Light, to finish around the end of October. And David will talk a little bit more about schedule. So with that, unless there are questions for me, I will turn it over to David.
All right. Thank you, Alan. For those of you that are participating and watching tonight, just want to give a hearty thanks and appreciation to Alan for many years of service to the city of Everett, long before I got there. His tenure is well known throughout the state and very much appreciated, and I can't express how much I'm going to miss him and how difficult it'll be without him. So thank you, Alan. Appreciate it very much. All right, so what I'm going to do is kind of look at a little bit real quickly is upcoming schedule. We are in this new normal, trying to get back to still taking care of business here with the city. And so I'm going to look at the upcoming Planning Commission schedule, and so hopefully we'll do what this app is supposed to do, is share my screen. So hopefully I choose wisely and get the right one on your screen. It's interesting because I can't see what you guys are seeing. So hopefully you're seeing a Planning Commission schedule. If someone could confirm that.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. So tonight, May 19th, doing the conversation with Rethink, but we'll follow that up our kind of a regular meeting schedule, the first and third Tuesdays of every month. So on June 2nd, we'll have some more conversation about Rethink Zoning, looking at historic resource chapter, lot and building placement, and local project review procedures. Also with the hope that you can spend some time on the what we present tonight, and if you have questions and more discussion, we'll come back to what we brief you on tonight at the next meeting as well. Moving along to June 16th, we have two docket applications that are happening. One for Evergreen Recovery Center, which is down off of Everett Avenue on the east side of I-5, and one for Hope Covenant Church off of Evergreen Way. And so we'll move forward with those, and those will kind of be our, they will be public hearings. And so this will be the first time where we'll be holding a public hearing event where we'll be taking testimony from folks, and presumptively we'll have to be doing it through the internet through this this type of venue for that. At that same meeting, we'll also we have to adopt new floodplain regulations. Allan's taken interim floodplain regulations to City Council here in June, and interim regulations require us to hold hearings and come back through the Planning Commission. So we would do that at your June 16th meeting as well, and make the amendments that is required by the in order for everyone to have flood insurance in the community. We'll do some more briefing on Rethink Zoning, Chapter 17, which is our airport compatibility, and looking at expanding that a little bit to include some Navy and port overlay. And then Dave Tyler will be there to talk about street, sidewalks, and pedestrian access. Tentatively, and this is a big tentative still, is that we have another docket application from Housing Hope to change the land use designations in the Norton Grand neighborhood, and we don't have all the parts to that, so it really is a tentative placeholder for right now for July 7th meeting. On July 21st, we come back with some final briefings of everything that Dave Tyler and I and other staff are working on with the Rethink. Hopefully we'll have a complete package for you of all the amendments to Title 19, 18, if there's any changes to Title 13, which is streets, and our local project review procedures, and some comprehensive plan amendments that we need to do as part of that. Based on that briefing, we'll prepare a final package, and looking at public hearings come August, your August 18th meeting for Rethink, and for also an amendment for our capital facilities plan for parks, have a public hearing and take testimony there in August, and then look at action at your first meeting in September. At that point, all of that will go be passed on to City Council with a goal of anticipating adopting some Rethink ordinance package by the end of October with that. So, are there any questions at all that anyone has on the schedule?
No question. Thank you, David.
Okay. Allan, David, thank you. I realized I got a little bit ahead of myself on the agenda here, and so I appreciate you getting me back on track with staff comments. Is there anything else, Allan or David, on that?
Nothing from staff comments. Just jumped into
Okay.
the Rethink Zoning part.
Well,
right now.
let me go ahead maybe and catch up to what I skipped before, the public comments. We do have the one item on the agenda tonight, but if there's anybody from the public who is calling in today who wanted to address the commission on any other matter that's not on our agenda tonight, this would be the opportunity to do that. I think what we're going to do is staff Cappy is going to call out the last four digits of numbers that are called in, and if your phone number gets called, that would be your opportunity to unmute and go ahead and make your comments again to the items not on the agenda, not having to do with the Rethink Zoning, because we're going to deal with that later. So Cappy, you want to go ahead and run through that?
Yeah. 1578. You can just state no comment.
Cappy, maybe what we should do is you could just call out the number and wait a few moments, and if they don't call, maybe just assume that that's a no.
Okay.
And we can move on. Maybe that'd be easier.
I'll do that. 4694.
Kathy, that's my number. This is Michael Finch.
Oh, thank you. Zero 007.
is Ishmael Mohammed. No comments at this time.
Six, 834. Seven, 395.
It's Chris Vallow. I have a comment or a question. So it's exciting to hear some people leaving, and that's really great. They have done a great service for the city of Everett. However, is there a contingency plan to replace these people and continue on with Rethink Everett and the planning department, et cetera?
Alan, I'm
Mr.
not
Chairman?
just address that, or we.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Alan Giffen. The administration will be replacing the planning director position. Not sure exactly the timing for that, but the intent would be to, yes, replace that position. Unfortunately, we will not be able to replace the position being vacated by Dave Tyler at the moment, and so we will be operating with fewer staff members, which is one of the reasons for the change in the work plan.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for the great job you've been doing.
Thank you.
Last citizen, David Koenig.
Yes, this is Dave. Earlier in the week, I raised the issue related to the environmental review and the timing of that related to this. There was a scoping process that was done on the Rethink Zoning, and I was told that that would be addressed tonight, so I'm interested in knowing when the EIS will be issued and public comment on that. Thank you.
And hopefully then we can maybe address that more appropriate and more timely with our agenda 1 item.
And that's it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for patience while we work with this process here. So now I believe we're ready to move to the Rethink Zoning on the agenda. So, Alan, you.
I think David will continue.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. So what I'll do is I'm gonna hopefully this is a challenging environment to present in when you're presenting something that you can't actually see. So if the chair or someone can let me know if something needs to be blown up in terms of scale that you're not seeing it very well, please let me know. So as talked about with Rethink Zoning, what we're going to do is kind of walk through the process of what we are anticipating to do right now. And so I will share my screen. So hopefully we're seeing a blue screen, Rethink Zoning screen.
Yes.
Okay. So first off, some of the revised expectations. What doesn't change is that what we're not going to do is changes that we were hoping originally looking at with landscape requirements. We weren't really looking at a lot of changes in critical area protections, but we were going to do a little bit of troubleshooting that we have in that, but we're not going to do that at this point in time. Nothing changes with our requirements for shoreline management. That's all governed by the Shoreline Master Program, which the city updated just last year. And as we'll talk about a little bit more detail, right now we're avoiding changes, substantive changes in the single-family zones. What does change, however, is that the things that we've already presented to the Planning Commission and to the City Council is that we are still proposing to move forward with the consolidation of the other zones. So the multifamily zones would be merged into 2 zones, the UR3 and UR4 zones. The commercial mixed-use zones would be merged into 3 zones. That would be the neighborhood business zone, business zone, and mixed urban zone. The mixed urban is basically what we did for Metro Everett. We called it urban mix there, switching the initials around. And that has also expanded to a few other areas where, like around the light rail stations, the SWIFT stations in the city. And finally, the next one is the industrial zones merged into 3 zones, 2 light industrial zones and 1 heavy industry zone. And we would have a new use table. So we are building off the Metro Everett use table. Right now, the zoning code, when we adopted the Metro standards, we always had the intention of having 1 use table and merging things when we did the Rethink Zoning process. So right now, technically, we have 2 different use tables and development standards, and so we need to try to get that back together. And so we're proposing to have 1 use table, and we're building off the Metro Everett use table and making a few adjustments to scale it up citywide. What also is happening, and we already briefed the Planning Commission, I believe, back in December, a new height chapter. We're consolidating, I believe, 10 different chapters together. And also dealing with the transition of heights to single-family neighborhoods. Dave Tyler's briefed you on new changes to the land division standards. In large measure, the land division standards we're pointing to development standards that are really within the zoning code and within the street provisions, and not regulating what happens after the land division in the land division process. Basically, land division is really supposed to be about what the infrastructure is and what the lots are supposed to be shaped, the sizes, things like that. We are working on a consolidated building form and design standards, and Dave Tyler will talk about that more later this evening. And we're doing residential design and open space standards, and I'll be talking about that next with our Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 standards. I already mentioned that we're looking at airport, some changes in notice process for airport compatibility, port and Navy, and then also some things for street sidewalks and pedestrian circulation. And finally, what we call is currently codified in Title 15 of the Everett Municipal Code, our local project review procedures. We're looking at a few changes within that to help streamline that process. So kind of want to talk a little bit more specifically about the single family zones. And again, what doesn't change is, first off, what doesn't change is the zone boundary. So what is zoned currently R1 today is R1 in the future, and same thing for R2 areas. And so those boundaries are all the same. There are some circumstances where the land use has changed because of underlying things, but otherwise all those boundaries are all remaining the same. Same thing with lot dimension requirements. If the current zone requires 5,000 square foot minimum lots, the draft that we're putting together would have 5,000 square foot minimum lots. We're not changing any of the building heights within the single family zones. We had some changes to address the heights and addressing the number of floors in single family zones, and we're not doing that at this time. So we're just going to 28-foot maximum. And we're also not changing the housing types allowed. And we spent quite a bit of time with the Planning Commission, Council, and in our last forum that we had in February, we actually talked about a lot of infill housing types, where we talked about duplexes and on corner lots and townhouses throughout our single family zones. None of that is changing in our draft at this point in time. So what we've done is we've just basically pulled over the standards of the existing code and have drafted that within our Chapter 5 and Chapter 8 and 9 as part of it. There are a few things that are changing. There are what we call the R1A and R2A. These are zones that did allow some townhouses. They're very isolated locations throughout the city, and most of them are actually built out already. And so there's very little of the R1A that's left, and the only difference in standards between them is how many units are allowed on a piece of property. And so we are proposing to merge those into the R2A zone. And so R1A would change and get merged into the R2A. And again, use table would be a new use table. And then really, again, a thing that's probably significant in single-family neighborhoods, we are actually looking at some changes to accessory building and accessory dwelling standards, and this affects both the height and some dimension standards, and we can talk about those details a little bit more as we get through this. So what I want to do is point people to the project website, and so we had built a project website, and it was based on this new strategy. We have made some adjustments in the last week. It's still a work in progress with a new strategy. We're changing chapter numbers around and things to kind of fit this new strategy. And so we have a few rough edges that we have to work through. But so if you go to everettwa.gov/rethink, you'll get to our project website. And so you'll find on there information about the project, the timeline, all of our maps, including an online interactive map. We have a library there, so the library will have, and I'm going to jump out to the page in just a second here, but it'll have all the links to the chapters and summaries of the chapters and maps. And also it's another way for people to get links to the Planning Commission and City Council agendas. So as everything that we do goes through the Planning Commission and then with recommendations to City Council. And finally is to get involved, sign up for Newsflash, because that's our way for us to help inform the public as to when things are happening. We're working on new strategies of how to get things put together, and so that's important for people to sign up for that Newsflash. So I'm going to jump out of this real quick, and I'm going to show you the project website and see if I can make this a seamless transition here, or not seamless, but imagine there's a few seams in this. So hopefully you're seeing a Google screen now.
Yes.
Okay. So if we go to Everett WA and to our Rethink website, and there we go. So hopefully our video feed, our browsers are working here, so that I do have my 22-year-old son at home, so I do get worried about bandwidth at times. But so if you go to our project website, Rethink Zoning, what you'll find is things about the project. If you go to timeline, we've updated the timeline to kind of show, and this is in the memo to the Planning Commission, to show what's going on here with the project. And it looks like I zoomed way too big there. But you see that the project timeline that we have here is rebooting the Rethink Zoning. We are going to do a briefing. Alan's going to do a briefing with City Council on June 3rd, and we'll continue with getting to a final draft for the Planning Commission's review July 21st, with a public hearing in August, and then City Council action in the September to October timeframe as part of that. So also on this project web page is that you can go to maps, and all the maps, we've updated maps, and so you'll find excuse me, you'll find zoning maps, building height maps, all the different maps at different scales. You can see 11 by 17 or 24 by 36, so you can get to maps that are more detailed as part of it. But you can also get to our online interactive map, and I know that we've done this demo for the Planning Commission once before, and hopefully when I click that, are you getting a screen that says initializing?
Yeah.
Okay, very good, thank you. So as you zoom in to these online maps, is that you get into a neighborhood, and it looks like I zoomed in around 47th Street. And so on the left-hand side is the current zoning, and on the right-hand side is the draft zoning. So if I click on a piece of area here, it shows that the current zone is R1. Single family, you can click on the residential uses. It'll take you out to our existing website that's out there that shows excuse me, what the current uses are that are allowed. And if you just scroll that bar to the left, all of a sudden you see that it changes to the draft zone, and it shows that the R1 zone is still the same thing, and it just goes back to allowed uses that are within that zone. And so again, there's no changes as you go into that area. But if I look a little bit closer to the E1 MUO zone, for example, down here, says that one is E1 MUO. And as I scroll to the left, it shows that that is going to be zoned mixed urban. I can click on the allowed uses here, and it'll pop open our latest use table that shows all the uses that are allowed, would be allowed within that zone. And so all the new zones are having tables that are like that. And we haven't, excuse me, when we do that for the R1 zone, for example, we actually do have that same thing for allowed uses. You can actually see the new zones, and you'll see that it's suburban residential, single family, and you'll see the same chapter 5 that is in front of the Planning Commission right now. So you'll see all the uses that are allowed within that. And so that kind of helps answer that question as to the transition between the existing zoning and the proposed zoning with the use tables in particular. Because when we merge those, some changes have had to occur, but what we're trying to avoid is the changes in these housing types as much as possible. So then I'm going to just look at the zoning library real quick. When we look at the Rethink Zoning library, what we're going to try to do is we're doing summary documents for all the chapters, and we're doing the draft code, and then if there's maps associated with it. And we'll also have a column out to the right-hand side that shows when this was last updated on the website. So if we're making some adjustments, for example, heights, we don't have additional briefings that are planned. And so we've integrated that 28-foot height standard. And so for the Planning Commission and those members of the public, this is a great chance for you to kind of take a look at those things, send comments into email to us, and provide that input. But if you click on the summary document, what you'll get then is just a summary of the changes that are there, talking about the heights for principal buildings there. We've tried to put this in language that people can understand what the difference is between existing standards and the proposed standards as we go through that. When you click on the chapter, then you'll actually get the draft chapters that have been drafted to date. So
were you able to watch what you wanted to? Oh, good.
I hear Mr. Koenig's voice. So Mr. Koenig, could you mute your mic? Someone's voice in the background's going there. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to remind everybody to please check your phone to make sure that your phone or your microphone are muted. We are getting background noise.
All right, so with the library there, again, those are opportunities for folks to see what is all out there. So I'm going to get out of that, and I'm going to go back to sharing. Get back to the PowerPoint slide, hopefully here. All right, do you have the whole slide or?
You're on, yes.
Okay. All right, so we walked through the timeline. So I'm going to just quickly kind of do a little bit focus again on the zoning map. This is again kind of a blow up. I picked an area down in South Everett along Madison. You can see the new map in the legend here, all the existing residential zones, single family, with the two new multifamily zones, the commercial, industrial, and other zones that are there. And all that information throughout the city and the online map is available for you. For the revised use table, so you've gotten a new chapter 5, and the Planning Commission has already reviewed everything on the right-hand side, the UR3 through the ag zones. Had quite a bit of conversation and input at the last one of the last meetings, and so those changes have been incorporated to this draft. If you don't see them, then we'll want to know about that. But what's new in here, again, is the introduction of these now the single family. We did have UR1 and UR2, but now we have the RS, R1, R2, and the R2A zones. And so this is a little snippet that shows the residential uses. You can see that the existing code is structured uniquely in that we actually do allow townhouses in all of our zones currently, but there's density requirements and other standards, and they were only allowed through a cluster subdivision process. And so what we've done is put that back in. We don't have the cluster subdivision. We have what we call the unit lot subdivision process now. But all the same standards that are in the existing code are here. The definitions have moved. Previously, we had the definitions within the table. It doesn't really fit this format, and so we moved the definitions to the end of the chapter. We have them right now in the draft that you've gotten. They are integrated within the chapter 5 so that you can see all these definitions of what 1 unit dwelling, 2 units, 3 to 4 are in there. I think I have a slide later about dwelling unit accessory. We'll call out that state law has changed, has redefined what a accessory dwelling unit is. And so it can be accessory not only to a single family, but it can be accessory to up to 3 to 4 units and other housing types. And so there will be a definition change of accessory, and we've had to modify the standards to accommodate the state law change this last year as well. So with that, that's a good segue into the residential and multifamily chapters. We've drafted 2 chapters. Chapter 8 is your basic residential standards. Currently in the code, we have small lot single family, which is for development of those single family lots, single family zones less than 5,000 square feet. And so that's moved into this chapter 8. We have design standards for townhouses and duplexes in the single family zones. I want to emphasize that this is not the design standards for townhouses and duplexes and multifamily zones. For that housing type and multifamily zones, you would go to chapter 9 and the multifamily standards. And so this is only for those housing types in the single family zones. And so they're a little bit more protective. They have a little bit more restrictions, protective of single family neighborhoods. They have a little bit more restrictions, including things like the front porch and entrance requirements and garage requirements for those housing types within those areas. And so those standards are a little bit above and beyond the standards for multifamily zones, because you're introducing another housing type in single family zones. And so trying to make them a little bit more compatible with single family. Again, we have the chapter 8 residential. There's quite a bit of different standards. I'm just going to call out the accessory dwelling units and accessory buildings are in there. Short-term rentals and temporary shelters are also within this chapter. For chapter 9, the multifamily standards, this applies to development in the UR3 and UR4 zones, and also to any multifamily development that's in commercial zones and where allowed in the industrial zones. We do allow some multifamily in the industrial zones, like around Everett Station, and so it would apply for that. There are some standards in there, not as restrictive, but for garage facades, particularly when they're the garage facades are close to the street front, and some entrance requirements. And we've done some modification to the outdoor and common area requirements, building off of some of the standards in Metro Everett. So I want to focus in a little bit on the Chapter 8 residential standards. And again, the same housing types and standards for single-family zones that is in the existing code. And so trying to make that with no changes at all in terms of density, minimum lot size requirements, heights, and what kind of housing type is allowed. So basic, same basic standards. For accessory dwelling units, the new state law defines a ADU to be attached to multiple unit buildings, and so we've integrated that. But what we've done is we've simplified the size calculations, but we've also reduced the size. If you're doing an ADU to a multi-unit building, it's a smaller unit that could be added to that because it was just adding a lot more density. So we're looking at a much smaller unit as you get into larger sizes or larger unit buildings for that. So originally, when we briefed the Planning Commission, we talked about taking out most of the ownership requirements for accessory dwelling units, but keeping with our strategy to not affect the single-family neighborhoods. Right now, the draft has the ownership requirement that's in current law is still maintained within the draft that we've presented to you. I want to point out that currently in our historic resource, our historic overlays, there's a kind of an additional density bonus that's within the historic overlays to allow infill within some of the neighborhoods. Basically, it's an accessory dwelling unit. What we've done is taken that out of the historic and put it into the Chapter 8 and the accessory dwelling unit. So there's only one place to look at for the standards. All those buildings will still be subject to historic commission review for the design and compatibility with it. But now there's not two sets of standards with slightly different requirements. For residential accessory buildings, we've consolidated the size calculation in there, but the one significant change or slightly significant change is that you could have a maximum of 3,000 square foot building now, but you would have to have a very large piece of property. The calculation is based on a percentage of the dwelling size or percentage of the lot, and with a maximum to go up to 3,000 square feet. So if you have a very large lot and a very large dwelling, then you could have a larger 3,000 square foot accessory residential building. And we've had some of those cases that have come before us, and the current size restrictions don't allow that. We do have new provision for short-term rentals, Airbnbs within the city. Requires some performance standards that would be in there. And then finally, for temporary shelters, current restrictions are 90 days. This is by state law, we have to allow homeless encampments within properties of religious institutions. And the limit is 90 days in a year. We've changed that to be a longer period of time. 18 months and 5 years, because once these things are established, they're really hard it takes a long time to establish them and then to take them down in 90 days. And so to allow a longer period of time, but with a review process that gives notice to neighbors and an opportunity for comment and input on that. So with that, that's a quick run through of that, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
I think we'll open up to any commissioners who might have questions. And I'll just remind anybody, if you do have a question, want to chime in, it would be helpful for everybody on the call if you could just identify yourself. I know it might get a little repetitive to say your name every time, but it does help for people who aren't familiar with voices to keep track. So are there any commissioners who have any questions or comments about the presentation so far?
This is Commissioner Lark. I have a quick question. I noticed we talked about commercial, we talked about single family, but we didn't talk about neighborhood business. Is there any plans on adjusting neighborhood business? Are we going to go with the conversation we had about that prior to, us reassessing how we're going to do this, or are we going to leave that be? I'd love your input.
Yeah, Alex, we did have that discussion, and we made some changes to the use tables as a result of that discussion, I believe. So yeah, we do have the neighborhood business zones. We also, I think, and Alan might help trigger my memory, but I think the other thing that we did is we made it so that the neighborhood business zone would not have to go through a comprehensive plan amendment in order to establish that neighborhood business zone. So we can think of some areas that are actually businesses within residential zones currently that are older, grandfathered, non-conforming things that they wouldn't have to wait basically a 2-year cycle to establish a new zone on that. And so I think that was part of our flexibility that we added, and that would be in the land use chapter.
Any other commissioners with questions?
This is Commissioner Labra. It's kind of just a question about that might just be a typo on page 17 of this chapter that you sent us, where it talks about applicability of group housing and temporary shelters. 2C, it says it shouldn't apply. It would not apply to tiny house communities, and then the next heading says that it does. So I just was sort of confused by that.
Okay, we'll certainly take a look at it. I think one of the challenges, and we've been trying to catch those things, is that we've moved sections around, and that's why we try to highlight a lot of things. But so tiny house communities. Let me try to explain state law, and that was changed in 2019. Is that the law says that we don't. They define tiny house communities, but we do not have to allow them. But we have to allow tiny houses in mobile home parks or RV parks, and so we have to allow tiny houses. So you can do a tiny house community in essence, but only as a temporary community. So when we look at that temporary shelter, that's the 18 months in 5 years as part of that. And so right now, we don't have a provision that's drafted that would allow a tiny house community as a longer term housing option within the community. So that's at least the intention. If there's some clarification in the code, we'll take a look at that, make sure that that's clear.
Maybe it's just the way it's shown or expressed, and I understand this is a draft and everything.
We'll certainly take a look at that. Yeah.
Any other commissioner questions?
Hi, Chair Yanasak, Commissioner Holland here. Just one quick question to staff. You mentioned in the, I guess you call them Chapter 5, 1905, that a revised definition for accessory DUs is proposed, but I didn't see it in the back table where all the definitions were. Is that something that's still being drafted, or did I miss it somewhere? Thank you.
Okay, it actually, it is, if you look at the back of Chapter 5, and I'll get back to trying to share my screen here. So number 7 there, you can see a detached accessory dwelling unit means an accessory dwelling that consists partly of or entirely of a building that is separate and detached from a single family housing unit, duplex, triplex, or townhome. And so that is a change right now. Accessory dwelling unit is only to a single family home.
Thank you. I was looking under A, so I missed it. Thank you, David.
You bet.
Any other commissioners with questions? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is Alan Giffen. I thought before we open it up for public comment, wanted to address Mr. Koenig's question about the SEPA review. And so when we were proposing to do the full-scale Rethink Zoning, we did issue a a determination of significance under state environmental law that says we were going to do a supplemental environmental impact statement on the changes. With the change in the work plan where we're scaling back and not making as many changes, for example, to the types of housing that would be allowed in single-family zones, or with the some of the transit overlay zones that we were talking about, or changes to how we calculate building height, we are at this point of the mind that we will not have to write a supplemental environmental impact statement, that we would instead do a less intensive review, a SEPA addendum to the existing EIS that adopted our comprehensive plan in 2015, because the scale of the changes that we're talking about here are really not increasing the capacity of our zones in any way that would create any significant adverse impacts. And so while we haven't issued that document yet, we're of the mind that it would not rise to the level of requiring a supplemental environmental impact statement. So I hope that's answers Mr. Koenig's questions, and he can ask questions later when you get to the public comments.
Great, thank you. Does that raise any other commissioner questions? David, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't.
Okay. If there's nothing else from the commissioners, then I guess we'll go ahead and move on to any public comment. We'll work this the same way we did earlier in the presentation. Kathy will go ahead and call out phone numbers of people who have called in and identify you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. And if that's your phone number and you wanted to make a comment, that would be your opportunity to do that. So Kathy, would you like to call through those?
Sorry, my mic wasn't on. 1578 0007 7395 I'm sorry. Could you all hear me?
I don't think we can hear you. I think we lost you for a while there.
Okay, sorry about that.
So Kathy, Pipa also reminded us to ask people to unmute by doing *6.
Yeah, I just did that, so.
Okay.
I thought I could just hit my button for Mike, but I will do that. Okay, so sorry about that. 1578 0007 7395 David Koenig.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have no more comments on the environmental review, just that it wasn't in the schedule. And I guess a revised schedule will be provided. I do have one general comment, and it's really a decision for the City Council, and that is under the Growth Management Act, for comprehensive plans and regulations, the time for public involvement is at that time. And once the plans are adopted and the regulations are done, then the idea is that development can go forward with little public involvement, and so that developers and citizens know that when things are approved, that there's not an opportunity to try to really slow things down, that development move forward. And in this new era, I question the ability of good public involvement for comprehensive plan changes and code changes in the format that we're doing tonight. And an example is I'm on the cell phone and watching it on the internet, and there isn't a sync between the staff presentation and web on the city site. So David Stahlheim would say things, and it would be several minutes later that the slide would be shown. So you can't really follow what is being said with the slides. And so I would just, it's really a policy decision on council if they want, there's some things I think that need to move forward, like capital facilities plan, because those are really important and citizens don't really follow that much. But when you have major comprehensive plan changes or code changes, that the public is able to comment on that, give their input to the planning commission and city council in a way that people understand, and not be challenged to understand what staff is saying with the links being slower and such. So I just raise that as an overall issue as you ponder going forward. And I'll make those comments to the city council too for their meeting, because I think it's important, that's why growth management was set up. They may change growth management because of the pandemic and virus, but it's really hard for citizens and myself here to comment when the presentations aren't synced with the verbal staff presentation. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Anybody else on the line? Is there anybody else on the line?
Staff presentation.
Thank you for those comments. Anybody else on the line?
Hi, this is Tina Hokinson from the Evergreen neighborhood, and I am having problem viewing. It looks like what is being shown on the screen is very fuzzy, so I haven't been able to really see what's going on. I appreciate that the meeting is online here, but it is a kind of difficult process to follow.
Tina, how are you watching it? Could you tell us what avenue you're getting it through?
Tina Hokinson from the Evergreen neighborhood, and I am having problem viewing. It looks like what is being shown on the screen is very fuzzy, so I haven't been able to really see what's going on. I appreciate that the meeting is online here, but it is a a kind of difficult process to follow. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm watching it on a large Mac computer.
How are you watching it? Can you tell us how?
I'm watching it on a.
This is Chris Val.
I'm watching it on a. I'm watching it on a large Mac computer.
Okay, thank you, Tina.
Okay.
This Chris Val has the same problem, and I just clicked the link on in the newsletter.
Are we back on here? It seems to me there's a lot of feedback going on right now, a lot of delay. Is everybody, are we all synced up here? Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
I think the comments about the format here are well taken. I think this is a learning process. We're all trying to figure this out. So certainly appreciate everyone's patience as we do work through this. Appreciate those comments. Anybody else on the line from the public wanted to comment at this time? Okay, if there are someone, we can always come back to you later. I thought that was Dave Tyler queuing up his part of the presentation.
Yes, this is Dave Tyler. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I think maybe let's go ahead and move into your presentation, and then we can come back to any additional comments or questions at the end of that. So go ahead, Dave.
This is David Tyler, planning staff. Hopefully the audio is okay. I'm on my phone. I'm going to share my screen right now, and I want to double check and make sure that people can see it. So I have a blue slide up right now on Rethink Zoning.
Yes, that's what we can see.
That's what you can see. Okay, good. Again, David Tyler, planning staff, and as the commission may recall,
it is I'm looking at it through the city website, and it is not being shown, and that's where the disconnect is. We were instructed to use the city website, and all I get is the Everett Planning Commission meeting there, and there is no other information. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So yeah, some people are getting the video and some are not. Apologize for that. I'm just going to walk through this. I assume the commissioners can see the blue slide.
Yeah, I believe the commissioners are able to see that as we're dialed directly into the meeting. I do think that, it's my understanding, anybody who is watching on television, there's a difference between the live feed and the online. The live feed is I think, going to be delayed as opposed to being in real time online. So somebody who might be calling in, but also maybe trying to watch on television is going to have a big disconnect.
Sure.
So yeah, again, appreciate these concerns as we work through these, but let's go ahead and David, I think the commissioners are live, so we can see in real time.
Okay, I'll try to narrate some of my images too. I don't have too many, so I think this will go pretty quickly. So we did do a briefing to the commission back in February on building form and design standards. At the time was chapter 20 or 21, excuse me, and we've renumbered it since to chapter 12. So hopefully nobody's being confused by the numbering change. And tonight I wanted to give just a quick review of those standards and some of the zone consolidation for commercial industrial zones. but also wanted to just kind of walk through how the standards would apply using a hypothetical example in terms of a project illustration that we got from our consultant makers. And then apply not just the proposed building form and design standards, but also other key standards that are part of Rethink Zoning. And so just to get started here, so under the light version of Rethink, again, we're moving the chapter to chapter 12, building form and design standards. And so for commercial and multifamily uses, those standards will apply in the UR3, the UR4, the NB, the B, business, mixed urban, and LI1, light industrial 1 zones. So I'm showing an image right now of the 3 proposed zones. This would be a consolidation down from the current 10 zones. And so you've got business, again, neighborhood business, and mixed urban would be the 3 zones. Showing a map just showing those particular 3 zones at the moment. And then for industrial uses, those standards will apply in the LI2 and HI, which is heavy industry zones. So same concept here. It's a industrial zone consolidation. Goes from the current 6 zones down to 3 presently. I'm showing a map of those 3 zones. Southwest Everett has a big cluster of industrial zoning, as does the North Everett waterfront on both the port area, west side, as well as east side of North Everett over by the Snohomish River and Smith Island. So no change in the areas that are zoned for industrial, just different zoning designations. And so those together, the chapter will apply to both multiple family uses, and there are additional standards in chapter 9 that David Stallheim talked a little bit about tonight for multifamily. And then for non-residential uses, divide those up into business and commercial, industrial, and other non-residential. That might be, for example, special uses, conditional uses, government facilities, that type of thing. So here's our example. This is a concept that makers put together, and this would be a hypothetical multifamily project on North Broadway. So it's the MU zone, mixed urban, and it would be a 42,000 square foot building, 6 floors, 80 parking stalls, 120 foot by 200 foot lot with an alley in the rear, and then on the other side of the alley, on the east side, it would be R2 zoning. So this is a good example because it gives a chance to show the transition and the code requirements that apply when you have a mixed urban or commercial zone butting up against a single family zone. And again, as David mentioned, this is an R2 zone, that's existing zone. That would not change under the current zoning concept. So generally, as a planner, what we do is we use sort of a checklist that we go through in taking a development project and applying the code. And so step 1, this is a very simplified version of that, so I'll just walk through it real quick. Step 1 is to verify zoning and permitted uses to make sure that's okay. Run through different map designations to look for special restrictions or unique standards would apply based upon a particular map designation. And then we'll go into the detailed review of development standards, applying them to a building, to a site, to get a project that could be approved. So zoning map, which is what I've got on the screen right now, zoning map of the city. We can confirm that zoning for North Broadway, generally speaking, is mixed urban. And then we go to table 5.1, that's residential use table. This is just a snip from that table. If you look on the left, The use is dwelling multiple family. Then you read across to the column in yellow. That is the MU zone. Then you look down, there's the letter P, which means multiple families permitted use in the zone. And then if you look to the right, under special regulations, you're referred over to 1909 for multifamily development standards, but you're also referred to note number 1, which says TOD streets. But that's not the designation for Broadway. I'll show you that designation in just a minute. So that note doesn't apply. Street designations. So we do have a map 33-1, which shows street designations. I've got that up on the screen right now. We have street designations current for Metro Everett. So under this concept, those designations would be expanded to apply citywide, including many of the commercial corridors in sort of the middle and South Everett. So if you look at the blow up on the right here, you'll see Broadway is red, which is a pedestrian street. So that means that it has a particular or unique set of standards for building design and public sidewalks and other things that would apply for property on Broadway. So the next slide would be our critical areas map. We'll run through that check and make sure that the site does not have any critical areas. In this case, North Everett was pretty much bulldozed flat many years ago, and so really no critical areas to speak of. That's an easy one here for this particular site. Next slide is a building height map. And so basically we have the map of the city on the left, and then a blow up showing sort of North Broadway on the right. And so that would indicate that the site, at least the corridor along Broadway, has a 4 to 6 floor maximum building height. And then the adjacent property, which is sort of the pinkish color next to it, R2 zone, has a 28-foot height limit. And so you've got also this range of heights for the floor, 4 to 6. Basically it's 4, but you can go higher as 6 with height incentive. And so I'm showing a slide right now which itemizes the different benefits that can be offered up to qualify for a height incentive. And so I'll just read them out here. One is affordable housing provided on the site, or historic building preservation is another option. Building a green, certified green building, LEED certified is another way to get a height incentive. Provide public parking, parking facility, public art, ag land preservation, that wouldn't apply here. Or provide some public dedication of public space or outdoor common area. Back to, and I have another detail which shows that dynamic in how standards are influenced by adjacency of single family. And so I'm showing a section from, let's see, a table and an illustration from height factor right now. And so on the left side is basically the zone that you're building in, and then next to that would be the adjacent zone, in this case R1, and then next to that you have a distance that you have to go back from the residentially zoned property, whereby within that distance, in this case it's 50 feet, the maximum building height would be whatever the height is for the adjacent zone. So in this case, the adjacent zone is a 28-foot height limit. So 50 feet back from there, you're still limited to 28 feet. And then once you're more than 50 feet back, you can go to the full height of the zone. And so there's a illustration here that shows sort of a profile view and a site plan view of what that looks like. And it also shows, it's a good example because it shows an alley, which we do have adjacent to Broadway or behind Broadway. And so you basically go from the property line across the alley, typically about a 24-foot wide alley, and then to get to 50 feet, you would be 26 foot into the development site before you could go up to the full building height. So that's your 50 feet, the 24-foot alley plus 26 feet of the development site. So moving on, table from the chapter 6, this would be showing zoning designations and setbacks for each zone. So we've got front setback, rear, in this case with alley, side, and side interior and street side. And so you can see for the MU zone, essentially no setbacks. It's intended to be a zone that, you know, people can build lot line to lot line. There is a caveat. If you do have property lines abutting each other, in other words, no alley in between or a street, then there would be a setback of 10 feet for the property zoned MU. In this case, there's an alley, so that sort of negates the setback requirement. And that's footnoted here in the table, so you can see footnote number 2. I think at the last Planning Commission meeting, there was a question about height standards and setbacks when adjacent to residential. So trying to address that here. And that's pretty much it for my quick little run through. I have a couple more slides, but I won't get into those unless there's some questions that come up. But at any rate, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any commissioners that have questions for Dave?
Oh, this is Commissioner Lark. I just have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Regarding mixed use and kind of the UR4, can you kind of tell me a little bit more about how much of a difference is there in the form, mass, and style of the buildings that are expected to be built in those two zones? Like, how different are the two buildings? As I see, we have different setback designations, and are the buildings actually going to be that different? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So you're asking about distinctions between the zones for setbacks?
I'm more or less asking. I'm kind of curious why. I'm trying to get a little more information on why the setbacks are different in UR4. I would think and expect like the building's mass, size, scale, etc. to be very similar to each other, and I just kind of wanted to get a little more fidelity on your guys's. Your planning department's decision making for that.
Yeah, the way the code is set up is it's really set up to allow for minimal or setbacks that reflect what the adjacent zoning and development is. So for commercial zoning, for instance, NB, B, MU, you see a lot of no setbacks required, and then maybe some 10s in the rear. And those are intended to address basically more of a residential context. Whereas if you've got, large commercial buildings, either in the downtown core or out in some of the, commercial corridors, you typically have no setbacks required because the concern about, compatibility and impacts of, height aren't as great when you're talking about business to business versus business to residential. And then you get into some of the residential zones, you do have more setbacks, and those pretty much reflect what we have today. Across the different R zones, you've got, 20 feet for the most part, and then you get to UR4, 10 feet in the front. Same with the rear, although no setback for UR4 in the rear. Until you get where you're adjacent to single family again, in which case there would be a rear setback for something a UR4 zone abutting single family. So I don't know if that really answers your question. Certainly with some of the building design standards, what we've done is we're using this chapter for large residential multifamily projects, and the standards are supplemented with the standards in Chapter 9. which focus kind of more on the residential aspect of a multifamily development, such as building entrances and open space and landscaping.
Roger that. I guess I'll just that answers a lot. I guess I'll just close with the thought that, looking at where the UR4 is in the city, it's still clustered around the downtown area, clustered around mass transit, and I don't see, especially. I would say I definitely agree with changing kind of the setbacks when it comes to transitioning to a lower density, making sure that transition's smooth. I get that, but for for UR4, it's abutted to the metro area. It surrounds the metro area. I don't know why. I don't understand the need for the minimum setback. It just seems like a lot of wasted space when we can be putting in density there in an area that would need density.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to, well, UR4 is still primarily a residential district. And so, and there may be places where UR4 abuts less intensive zoning. And so the idea is to try to achieve a transition, from a single family to the multifamily to the downtown core. And that's just sort of a middle step between single family and the downtown core.
Any other commissioner comments or questions?
Yes, this is Commissioner Zielinski, and I just have a quick question for you, David, regarding the table that I'm looking at on page 4 of your handout, which deals with facade standards for the various zones. And if I'm reading this table correctly, it appears that there are more standards applicable in the light industrial zone than there are in the business zone. And if I'm reading that correctly, I'm just wondering what your thinking is in having it that way.
Okay, so you are referring to, let's see, is that table 12-1?
Yes.
Okay. So for residential uses in the LI1 zone, we have a ground floor ceiling height of 12 feet. Same thing for the mixed use zone, and then no similar requirement for UR3, UR4, and the NB and B zones.
Yes, I'm basically comparing the B column with the LI1 column, and I would have kind of expected them to be similar, and yet I see a lot more X's in the light industrial column.
Yeah, in the LI1 zone, to be clear, is really the light industrial zoning that's focused around North Everett. So it's the area down near the Public Works Service Center. It's down by or just south of Lowe's. And then there's a few other areas that are LI1. So it's really sort of, part of it's in Metro. And so, the focus there is to try to maintain similar standards for that part of Everett based on the geographic similarities, being within Metro, having a similar lot pattern, wanting to keep a similar building style. And then for the business zone, those areas are more sort of out on the perimeter or on the corridors. So Evergreen Way, Everett Mall Way. And so different style of development out there, not as compact. We don't necessarily have the same level of treatment, building design treatment out there that we do closer to the downtown. So I think that's kind of the thinking. And these standards, the LI1 standards, are sourced from Metro. So those are already in place. Mm-hmm. The standards for the business zone will be all new. Right now, we really don't have any building design standards at all for the business zone. And so everything that we get through this chapter would be new. So I don't know if that explains the context very well, but mainly it's the connection to Metro that drives the different standards for the LI1 versus the business zone.
Okay, yes, that does help explain it. Thank you.
Okay. Dave, and for those of you also following along, I think there's a disconnect between your summary document, because you refer to, I think that's where Michael was referring to, is a table 12.1, which is actually in your code as table 12-3 for facades. And the difference in 12-3 is the business zone only regulates facades longer than 100 feet, but doesn't do the other things. So just the FYI, that's a little cleanup that we have to do to make our summary sync with the actual code chapter. But that's what Michael was, I think he was looking at the summary document.
Oh, okay. I apologize
Yes.
if that didn't get to your question, Mike.
No, it did. It did. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Any other commissioners with questions? Okay, hearing none, we could move to any public comments or questions that there may be. So we'll again follow the similar procedure, and I appreciate that some people are having some disconnect between the audio and the video, and we'll keep trying to work through this. But Kathy, you want to go ahead and call through last four digits of phone numbers?
Sure. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. 1578.
No comment.
0007. 7395.
This is Ismail Muhammad. 0007.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. I have a couple of comments on the presentation by Dave Taylor. First of all, the city of Everett will lose a very good planning director who has worked very hard to get city to this level, and hopefully it's going to be hard to fill those shoes, but I want to thank Alan for his services. These technical difficulties that we are facing, the disconnect between the presentation and the public input, it's kind of, I agree with the other public comment that the idea of public to be engaged in this decision making, it's because of the delay. I'm totally disconnected, and the screen was fuzzy too when David was presenting the tiny presentation with smaller words. One solution that I can suggest till we figure out what we're going to do is maybe we can post these presentations online so we can print it and see it while we are listening to it till we figure out a total connect to that. That might help us into resolving this for the time being. In Dave Tyler's presentation and hypothetical project, if the property on Broadway is attached to an R2 zone, there are some height incentives. I wanted to reconfirm that there is another way of getting benefit of the height incentive is by payment in lieu of if somebody is not participating in all those 5 or 6 areas. There is a provision in Metro Everett which allows that to be payment in lieu of, so the city can decide where to spend that money. I wanted to find out if that option would be there or not. And if there is an area which is adjacent or butting the historic zone, how is that going to affect the design standards for the building in MU. These are just some comments for now. Thank you.
Adam, I can help answer those questions if you wanted me to do that now.
Go ahead. That'd be great.
The incentives, the height incentives are the same from Metro Everett for the payment in lieu of, and so we do have those provisions still for public art and affordable housing. You can either provide the housing on site or do a payment in lieu of. So those same provisions are there. We expanded the height incentives to also include public parks and open space, and so that's the only new addition that's there. And again, that has a payment option for that as well. So those same provisions are there, Ishmael. So with respect to adjacency to historic neighborhoods, if it's not in a historic overlay, the standards of whatever the code is still there. So the height transition, so that Dave Tyler showed. So if the adjacent zone has a requirement of 28 feet in height, you're going to have to meet that distance separation of 28 feet, whether it's of 28 feet in height, whether it's a historic neighborhood or another neighborhood. So we don't, all neighborhoods are created equal, and so we have the same protections there.
Thank you, David.
Okay, commenter 7395.
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. David Koenig?
No additional comments.
Thank you. And that looks like it's it.
Okay, Adam, are you?
That ends the list.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry. Then I think that brings us to the. Are there any other commissioners who wanted to last opportunity? Hearing none, then I would say that brings us to the end of agenda item 1. Staff, is there any other business?
Yeah, Adam, there's a couple of things I see in my email stream, so I just kind of want to do a little bit of follow-up on some things, if I could.
Definitely.
So first off, the memo that we sent to the Planning Commission about tonight's meeting, I think from Allan, that talked about our briefing to City Council in May. The City Council has put that back a week, and so earlier tonight I talked about June 3rd, and so the briefing in front of City Council is going to be June 3rd. So we'll do an update of this with our City Council on June 3rd. So just wanted to confirm that. Second is that our great communications team, Pipa, in the background here running things. So we'll work on some of the bugs here to try to get a thing that works a little bit better for everybody. Couple things is that your browser does make a difference. So Google Chrome and Internet Explorer perhaps, but Edge doesn't work. But I always find all the city website stuff works a lot better in Google Chrome. So for those of you that have been perhaps using a different browser, I think that's any of our city website. Just I find I always use Google Chrome, and so I just want to get that out to people because I know that will be better. Tonight was really about trying to brief the Planning Commission, but we wanted to invite the public along with. We are working on some other ways to outreach to the public where we can have better communication, and so this was kind of a trial balloon, and so we'll be working on on those. We're looking at having some specific forums where people can directly engage through the platform, where they can get in and have more of a direct connect rather than a telephone connect. And I think that's been part of the challenge that we have there. So we'll work on that, and we definitely have to try to get that better before we have those public hearings come in June. So with things, so I think those are the things that I kind of see in my email stream that came in from a few of the people that are listening tonight. So appreciate everyone's patience. I really want you to go to our library to get information and send comments to us at planning@everettwa.gov, and all those comments will get onto staff and to the Planning Commission and City Council as we go forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. I know a lot of work and a lot of flexibility. People had to be flexible to make this even happen tonight, and we're still working through the kinks. So definitely appreciate everyone's patience and cooperation as we figure this out together. I did have a question maybe for Allan. I know you're with the city through the end of June. Are you going to be joining us in our meetings in June? Thank you, David. Any other comments?
Yes, I will be participating in the June meetings.
Okay, so this is not your last meeting.
It is not.
Okay, great. Unless there's anything else, and I can't see hands, so catch me if there is.
Is Commissioner Lark right here?
Oh, go ahead.
I just I wanted to say, first of all, I think this was we made a lot of progress tonight on trying to work through this technical difficulty, and because I don't know exactly how able to connect I will be to the commission meetings. I want to continue to add my voice to this conversation, but I do want to make sure I do impart one important thought I have. We are standing here on a pandemic on the brink of probably a global depression. Looking back 10 years ago at the height of the Great Recession, we saw the choices and policy that we made and how we approached the Great Recession, and it had policy impacts. And those policy impacts and decisions started in land use. And the decisions that we made basically, took people out under the age of 40 out at the knees. Most of my peers can't afford homes. We continue to have land use that keeps it out of reach for a lot of folks. And housing policy and land use policy contracted growth by about 10%. Cut out about 10% of potential growth since the Great Recession. And as we're thinking about, the choices we make going forward, we need to be thinking about what are we going to be doing? What are our land use choices going to do to help working class families, to help people build wealth in this city, to help people be able to build a future in this city, and that these choices and decisions and policy choices we make are going to be basically kind of the through which all economic growth and recovery will happen. And so I think it's it's a shame that we're losing Allan. Allan, I will miss the heck out of you, and Dave, you as well. I've just been an absolute pleasure working with you, and I can't actually stress enough how important I think it would be for the city to replace both positions in the planning department, because it's through the planning department, through our built environment, is how we will, build a platform for economic growth, recovery, and opportunity here. So we need all hands on deck, putting together good policy that will make sure that people have access to opportunity. And so that's just my thought that I wanted to share. And I appreciate y'all letting me take the time to say it.
All right, thank you. I guess I'll give one more opportunity. Anyone else? All right. Again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate all your time and attention and patience. We'll go ahead and call this meeting adjourned.